What? On your mark, ready, set, let's go. Dance floor pro, I know, you know, I go psycho when my new joint hit. Just can't sit, gotta get jiggy with it. That's it, now, honey.
Happy Friday to you. Welcome to Squawk Alley. I'm Carl Quintanilla with Sarah Eisen and Mike Santoli at Post 9 of the New York Stock Exchange. John Ford is off today. Joining us from out west today is Foundation Capital General Partner Paul Holland. A lot to get to with Paul. It's good to see you, man. First up, we'll talk some Snap, reporting earnings after the bell that disappointed on revenue and growth while posting that wider than expected loss. Stock is down this morning and currently trading, as you can see, down almost double digits, was down 11% earlier today. Paul, a lot of discussion about DAUs, not that they just missed, but that Instagram has been able to add so many more to stories in the first half than Snapchat has. What'd you make of the quarter?
Well, Carl, I think the Snap story is fascinating and complicated at the same time. I think you've got people here in the Valley that are sort of Snap aficionados and cheerleaders, and you've got folks that are more on the Facebook corner. I think what you thought of a year ago, maybe even a year and a half ago, is you really thought Snap had the momentum and really had a chance to overtake Facebook in part of its core audience. I think that whole strategy is very much in doubt now. And part of it has been, of course, that Instagram in particular has been able to copy many of the most popular features that Snap had pioneered. I've got 3 teenage daughters. They're all heavy Snapchat users, but they're all heavy Instagram users also. So it's going to be an interesting time for Snap going forward. And I think the analogy, is it going to be Facebook? Will it kind of rebound and come roaring back? Or is it going to be Twitter and sort of struggle along as people worry about those DAUs and about the usage? And I think that's an open question.
Yeah, the company hated that analog going into the IPO, privately at least, said it was somewhat unfair. A lot of people agree. But at this point, Paul, is the smart business decision to step on the gas, start spending even more money where they can, or try to save some dry powder?
Well, I think you've got, there's a couple ways I would look at this. One, first, just kind of closing out on the stock part of it. One of the things that people sometimes forget is that the employee lockup is coming off. And when that employee lockup comes off, in most cases, and I think even in the case of Facebook, when they got to that period, it'll depress the stock for some period of time. So I don't think you need to over-rotate on that point. You need to see what the real long-term trend is going to be in the stock. So I think that's part of it. But then the other side of it is, yes, they have this huge war chest that they built up very smartly over a period of time. And as you saw in the spending, their spending tripled from last year. And so I think they're willing to step on the gas, as it were, to be able to get out there and to be able to really establish their dominance in that teen marketplace where they've been so strong now. I think one of the things that's going to be very interesting to see the balance in terms of what their spending is going to be as it relates to their core North American market and as it relates to international markets. And that'll be a fascinating thing to watch over the next, say, 18 months.
It's been fascinating to also watch the evolution of Evan Spiegel since this company went public. Before they actually went public, everyone described him as a product genius. Then after the first earnings call, he was described by some investors as arrogant, playing down the competition, playing up the fact that they wanted to be a camera company. And then last night, he took more initiative, at least on some of the advertising goals. How would you describe what we're seeing in terms of the leadership of Evan Spiegel now in a public company?
Sarah, that's a great point. There were even rumors back when the Snapchat was getting their advertising efforts started that they were having some kind of balky times out there with the major advertisers. They had some initiatives underway that just didn't seem like they really took off from that perspective. Clearly, they've gotten through that phase, that sort of that rough start phase, and they've gotten to a place where they have a sustaining business now. And of course, they have this phenomenal youth demographic to be able to play into. But I think that characterization is an interesting one, partly one, because I think there is a real chance that unlike a Facebook where they brought in Sheryl Sandberg and really handed over a lot of business operations to her, really a global quality executive to do that, in the case of Snap, I think they were really counting on their fanatical users and their continuing innovation around product. Perhaps we're going to see some of the evolution of Evan, just as we see with many young CEOs as they grow over time and learning more than just kind of the areas that are core and that are most comfortable for them. But I do have to say this is kind of a two-edged sword because, you know, the way Snapchat can come roaring back is to innovate yet more fully around the product. And yet, at the same time, they'll have this pressure to say, okay, look, you've got to make this a more mature business. So they're coming into a complicated period in their history.
Yeah, fascinating to watch for whether you're investing or not, obviously. Paul, we're going to switch to Uber. Stay with us here. We want to send it briefly out to our Deirdre Bosa, who has a little more on Benchmark's lawsuit against Travis Kalanick this morning. Hey, Deirdre.
Hey, good morning, Carl. Now, Benchmark, of course, led the movement to get Kalanick to resign. Now they're trying to get his seat on the board and cut him off from Uber entirely. Now, this is a remarkable development. Uber is Benchmark's single most valuable investment. Up until now, this tension has been playing out through leaks, but now it is all out in the open. Within the nearly 40-page suit right here, Benchmark accuses Kalanick, among many things, of a selfish power grab, hiding information critical to the Waymo lawsuit. Now, Benchmark was one of Uber's earliest investors. It participated in 3 funding rounds starting in 2011. This is an investment that, according to the lawsuit, has translated into a 13% stake of the company, last valued at nearly $70 billion. This has amassed tremendous paper profits for the VC firm, but the average holding duration for a VC investment is around 7 years. Benchmark is getting close to that with Uber and has been looking to cash in on some of those profits. Now, additionally, Kalanick has accumulated 35% of Uber's common stock, which gives him an outsized influence in company votes. And just to add another layer to all of this, a source tells me that Uber's valuation has fallen by billions in secondary markets, perhaps giving Benchmark more incentive to cash out before another funding round. SoftBank could be one solution under the right circumstances. And Benchmark has also asked for a preliminary injunction, guys, which, if granted, would take Kalanick out of the CEO search process completely.
Wow, that's a lot of news in there. Thank you very much, Deirdre. Paul, we're reminded of what Gurley tweeted just a few weeks ago, saying Travis would be very few entrepreneurs have had such a lasting impact on the world. This is a serious separation, isn't it?
Yeah, it's certainly a surprise from my perspective. I spent most of my operating career working for various partners over there at Benchmark. I have all the respect in the world for them as a firm. I think Uber's a phenomenal company that executed amazingly well. It's unfortunate when things come to this. Given that it's a pending lawsuit, it's probably not appropriately for me to try to comment on specifics around that. But if you look at just the tension between boards and founders when you get into these conflict-type situations that you're seeing there, this is a fairly common phenomenon. And, you know, you hope to be in situations, and I've been pretty fortunate on my boards, for the most part, have avoided this kind of drama, albeit at a smaller scale. But it happens at times, and there's many, many billions of dollars at stake. There are different visions for how companies should be run between the founders and sometimes between professional investors and then professional management that comes in. I think if you look at a company like a Google, I think that's a company that handled that very, very well over a long period of time. You know, they had a terrific professional CEO that came in and worked with the company for some period of time, and now the founder, Larry Page, is running the company with Sergey Brin. So I think there are ways you can do this and you can work very effectively with your board, and for reasons that I don't know because I'm not close enough to it, that has not been able to work out for them.
Is it clear to you, Paul, that this conflict has much to do with the strategy for Uber in terms of exactly how the business should be run, as opposed to, you know, when maybe they get some liquidity, or perhaps who should be leading it from a cultural perspective? As they look for a CEO, are there big questions as to the direction that this business should take?
Yeah, again, skipping the specific case here because I don't want to get involved in it with them. When it comes to these type of situations, what I see happen is that the liquidity angle gets over-reported. People will read things like the 7-year holding period and things like that. Look, we've had companies, we funded Financial Engines back in 1996, and it didn't go public until 2010, and we're absolutely thrilled with the company. It's done great all along the way. Obviously, we love it when things go quickly, but at the same time, we're here to try to build enduring companies. And I know that's what the entire board is trying to do in their situation, to try to get that to happen. Yeah, I just think you run into these situations where it's mostly about a clash over control, and it's a clash over who's going to run the company. Oftentimes what happens when people talk about venture capital is they say that you have one major decision to make as a venture capitalist on a board, which is who's going to be the CEO, who's going to run the company, and sometimes it comes down to that.
You keep saying that this is common, and especially having a big investor clash with a founder. Have we ever seen, though, one board member outright sue another board member for fraud?
You know, I'm not a historian on the law. I'm kind of a broader historian on the Valley, as you guys know, but I can't remember a case like this, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't occurred over time. And, you know, I suspect there probably has been something, given that there literally have been hundreds of thousands of funded companies over the last 50 years. So.
Yeah.
It sometimes turns contentious. Paul, you were an early investor in Netflix. We've talked about it several times. It's been a big week for streaming and content news with Disney's announcement it would pull some movies and shows from the streaming service. We've had discussions here at this desk all week about what it means for Netflix, how far along they are in the race to make and withhold content for themselves. Did you see Disney as being existential?
I don't think Netflix has any single existential threat, in my opinion. They've done such a strong job, and as you'll recall, it was my partner Mike Hsu that made the investment in Netflix back in 1999 on behalf of Foundation Capital. So we've been obviously very close to the company throughout, and the management team there and I worked together at our first startup, Pure Software. But if I look at what's going on now, certainly I haven't spoken to people at Netflix about this, but I'm sure they're not thrilled about the fact that a big account, effectively like a Disney, wants to kind of go their own way. And yet at the same time, I'm also reading that perhaps some of the major properties will actually stay on the Netflix platform for a while. I don't really know how that's going to shake out. But I think it's part of a much larger trend that, you're right, Carl, we've spoken about several times here. 4 or 5 years ago, I had friends in media, and they were looking at Netflix as sort of like the greater fool. They said, wow, these guys are going around, they're buying all of our properties, they're spending all this money, this is great. Well, there's no free lunch. At the end of the day, what Netflix was doing was pursuing a strategy of creating their own content. And now, of course, now that we've seen that strategy work out brilliantly. So Disney is one of the latest. I've lost count. There must be 24 separate media properties that have started their own approach to an on-demand subscription service. I wish them luck. I wish all of them luck in terms of that. I wouldn't want to compete with Netflix if I had any choice.
Yeah, and Paul, of course, Ted Sarandos of Netflix said, look, this is why we've been so big in original content for so long. Everyone saw the general direction things were going. And, of course, the bull case for Netflix is that as subscribers grow, if it goes from $11.5 billion in revenue today to $22 billion if it doubles, their original content costs are not similarly going to double. There's going to be economies of scale. It's going to be very profitable at some number. I wonder if the fear, though, is that new subscriber signups are so contingent on new content. In other words, that it's a bit of a treadmill. It's hard to get ahead of. Do you worry about that for Netflix?
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about that for Netflix. I can't think of anyone I know in my universe that's going to change their subscription as a result of any one studio or player coming or going on onto the platform. So I don't think that aspect of it is going to be the case. I think if I'm looking at Netflix as a potential investor, I'm looking at the more holistic elements of the company. Are they succeeding on original content? Check. Are they succeeding on their international expansion? Where now, if I understand it correctly, I don't know because I don't really follow the public information on this. If I understand it correctly, they're getting pretty close to where it's 50-50 international and domestic. And that's a thing where, if you recall, say 5 or 6 years ago, Netflix was severely criticized for having such an immature international business. So my judgment, for whatever it's worth, is when the Netflix management team puts their mind to something, they figure it out, they go and execute, and they come out number one in the space.
They have certainly worked their way out of corners before, as we've seen. Paul, thanks so much. You covered a lot of ground. What a week for tech. Paul Holland.
I appreciate
joining us
it.
from out
Thank
west
you all.
from Foundation.